The last thing I need to do with the application is add the code for the View Report by Custom URL button. And that builds a custom URL for the report and render format that the user selects using the actual report parameter metadata. The parameter name-value pairs are going to be appended to the URL as a string, a query string, because that's how you build that custom URL. Conceptually, what I'm going to be doing is the same as what I did for the collection of parameters when I use the execution web service. But now I'm not going to be using the execution web service. I'm going to be using information from it, but we're going to build a custom URL and redirect the user to it. All right, so the first thing I need to do is add yet another custom method that is going to build the query string. And essentially what it's going to do is loop through the required parameters, add the name to the query string, get a value for it, and then put it all in a string, and then later on in the main index action method, just concatenate that on to the end of the URL. All right, so this is another private method. It's going to return a string this time, and I'll call this getParameterQueryString. And it's once again going to get this execution info object, because that's the object that contains all the information for those parameters. All right, first thing I'll do is create a query string variable in order to hold the results. And then I need to loop through that collection of parameters. So I'll use a for each and use the report parameter. Quite sure why that isn't showing up. Same thing happened with when I was creating the other method. But anyway, we'll go with it. It is a valid object within that web service. And I'll call this port param. And I'm going to use that parameters collection and loop through that collection of objects. All right, so the first thing I need to do is take that query string variable and add onto it the base information. So the first thing I need to do is add on the leading ampersand that indicates in a URL in a browser that this is a query string parameter. And then I'm going to provide the name of the parameter. Okay. So this is the name of that value because I have to use the internal name of the report parameter, supply that to the report. And this is how I get that information. Okay, and then divide and equals. And that's the base query string. Okay, so it just has the name at this point. Now I need to get the value. So I'm going to use a variable called paramValue and set that equal to an empty string again. And then once again, I'm going to use a switch statement to do the lame set specific values for all of the parameters. Now, rather than have you watch me build that switch statement again, I'm going to burgle it from this method here. This raises the issue that in a real application, I probably factor this code out, put it in a separate function, pass in the name of a parameter, return a value, but again, just keeping things simple. But what I need to do here is just replace all of these with paramValue. So anytime you copy and paste code from someplace else in an application, probably should be factored out. And I would certainly do that in a real application. Okay, so there we're once again using the parameter name, setting paramValue to a particular value. And then all that's left to do is then use that query string variable again and concatenate on that paramValue. And so at that point, query string contains that full query string, if there's one parameter or many parameters, they're all separated, because the delimiter is this ampersand. Okay, again, that's part of a URL. All right, then all we need to do is return that value, and we're done with that method. And I'll hit Control Save. All right, so now we need to come back up to this action method and implement this conditional code block. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a string URL, because this is going to contain, when we're done, the complete custom URL. So the first thing I need to do is build the base of the URL. So I need to specify the report server. Remember, we got that from the app settings right there. And then concatenate on a string with a question mark. That's part of that custom URL that Reporting Services uses. And then the report folder. That needs to be the next part of the URL. And then a slash. And then the name of the report. And we got that from what the user selected on the page. So that's just the value of the drop-down list box on the main page. And then need to specify that we want to render the report. So this is a query string parameter in itself, and it uses the command parameter, which is a report server command. Tell it to render the report. And then also need to specify the format. So that's the query string name, rs:format. And then I need to concatenate on the format. And that is another thing that the user selected in the display page, and we get that as a parameter to this action method. Let me go ahead and switch over to 2 lines here. Okay, so that's the base part of the URL. Next thing is we need to check to see if this report has any required parameters. So use that exec info and the parameters required. And that's going to be true if there's any parameters, false if not. And if there are parameters, then I'm just going to concatenate on that query string that I get from the getParameter query string, that new method that I just added, and I pass into that the exec info object. All right, so when that code executes, this method builds up that string, and I just can concatenate that on to the end of the URL that has the base of the custom URL. And then all I need to do is provide a return, and in this case I'm going to use the redirect method that creates a redirect action method, pass in that URL, and that tells the browser to redirect to this custom URL where it displays the report. All right, I'll save my work and run the application. All right, so it's a good sign that the page loaded again, so I didn't break anything too badly. So I'll go ahead and view the report by custom URL for this category sales by year report. Click on that, and we get an error. Let's see, the path of the item, sample reports, category sales by year. Okay, that comma doesn't look right. And format, oh, okay, so I don't have an equal sign for this parameter. So again, I'm not quite sure what the problem is there, but let's deal with this problem first. So I'll close that. And so here's the code where it's a problem. And yeah, right there we don't have an equal sign. Okay, everything else looks fine here. I don't know where that comma was coming from. That might just be an artifact of the displaying the URL on that error page. So let's go ahead and try this again with that correction to the format parameter. And click on the link one more time. And that fixed it. Okay, so that rogue comma must have just been something in the error page that was displaying it and formatted it somehow. And so there we have our report via a custom URL. And as usual, Reporting Services is actually redirected to this report viewer page, but then also includes all of our parameters here to display the category sales by year, render it, and using the HTML 4.0 format. All right, so back over here, let's look at a report that has parameters. Product sales ad hoc, use a custom URL. Now the difference here is that because I'm displaying the report using this custom URL, I get the HTML viewer up here, which includes the panel that lets the user change the parameter values. Now if I wanted to, I could add an additional query string parameter onto the custom URL to turn that panel off. And then they wouldn't be able to customize which parameters they got, although they could modify the URL if they were savvy enough to do that. And in fact, you can turn off this HTML viewer entirely if you want to. Now you can see where we have the 8/1/2006 to 8/20/2006, so it's picking up the correct parameter values. All right, so our custom URL is working with and without parameters. And one more thing to check, I'll come back up to this category sales by year and switch to, say, a PDF format just to make sure that's still working. And now, because I'm using a custom URL, Internet Explorer is prompting me to either open it or save it. Instead of, like in the code that executed the report via the web service, I was actually rendering that out to the browser. And in this case, the browser knew what to do with PDF files because I have that custom extension installed. But because I'm doing this via URL, it doesn't see that. So if I want to view the report, I just click on Open, and then it opens it up within this Foxit report viewer. Just happens to be the default viewer on this machine.